fair to say I'm utterly obsessed with Mark 1 and Mark 2 Ford Escorts. This bit here is bent. Snapped. We have a problem. The welder started playing up. In the last video, I brought Heidi's front wheels forwards quite a lot to give her some extreme caster. If you haven't seen that video, definitely go and check it out to find out why I think caster is going to help me in terms of drifting and to find out how exactly I did this modification. Now that Heidi's front wheels are in the position that they're going to be in, it means I'm going to be able to finalise the position of these ridiculous screw-on front arches. And I'm really looking forward to it because it's going to involve some butchery with regards to cutting away some of Heidi's front wings. I'm also going to be finalising the position of the rear arches, but before I do that, I've got some bits I want to do on the rear end to do with Heidi's rear axle. If you're a regular viewer of my content, click the like button now because it's a massive help. Alternatively, if you're new to the channel, click subscribe now and welcome. I'm Marcus Hayes, and it's fair to say that I'm utterly obsessed with Mark 1 and Mark 2 Ford Escorts. Now, before I get stuck in working on Heidi, I've got a new product to show you. What we've got here is a bung that's a nice tight fit in the back of a Type 9 5-speed gearbox and a Rocket 4-speed gearbox. And this is an awesome tool that you can use when you remove or refit a gearbox to make sure that the oil doesn't spill out the back of it. This has been 3D printed, and this bung is now available on my website at marcushayesuk.com. It's really sturdy and well made. I'm loving the big handle, and whenever I've poked a prop shaft in the back of a gearbox when I'm removing it to stop the oil spilling out, which can be a bit cumbersome, so I'm really glad to have this instead. But yeah, whenever I've put a prop shaft in the back, I've always cable tied it to the gearbox just so that it doesn't fall out whilst you're removing or refitting the gearbox. So this handle is going to be really handy for that as well, excuse the pun. Now Maud, my other model Mk2 Escort, runs a Type 9 gearbox, so yeah, really glad to add this to my tool collection. So head over to my website now and grab yours. All right, so as I say, I want to start today by turning my attention to Heidi's rear axle. So let's get her rear end jacked up and I'll show you what I'm going to get up to. All right, so before I finalise the position of Heidi's rear arches, I want to lower the rear suspension. And I've got a set of lowering blocks and some longer U-bolts to do that. And for those that don't know, the lowering blocks go basically in between the leaf springs and the axle, or this saddle bit of the axle, which essentially lifts the axle up, which in turn lowers the rear end of the car. But I thought, whilst it's a part for me to fit the lowering blocks, I may as well do a modification on this rear axle that I've been planning to do. Now, essentially, I'm going to be strengthening this saddle bit here, which is attached to the axle. As you can see, it's hollow. And on Maud, my other model Mk2 Escort, and Esther, my Mark 1 Escort, this bit here is bent basically from the strain of the U-bolts clamping down on it. And yeah, this one is nice and straight. And I've been advised by a couple of people through the internet to strengthen this off, so to box it in essentially. So I'm going to weld in a piece of metal that is welded to this, but also welded to the axle to basically box that off. And I'll do the same at the front and of course the same the other side. Now I've been looking at this and it might be possible for me to do it with the axle in situ, but I think it's going to be more sensible for me to completely remove the axle to do this modification. Now I have already gone round and wire brushed some of the threads of the nuts and bolts that I need to remove and sprayed them with the 9-in-1 lubricant from my friends at Kent Europe. So hopefully everything's going to come apart okay, but you never know with these old Fords, you know, this car or this part of this car has never been taken apart by me, unlike the other two, which nowadays come apart quite easily because they've been taken apart so many times by me. So yeah, I don't know how this is going to go. I might end up being forced to try and do this welding with the axle in situ, but yeah, I am going to try and completely remove the axle. Whilst I'm at it, I'm going to be removing this anti-roll bar because she won't be running an anti-roll bar. I've got something planned for the rear axle setup that I haven't done before actually, which I'll talk about in a future video. So yeah, going to remove the rear anti-roll bar while I'm doing this. It's just attached to the axle there and attached through these long bolts here. But yeah, other than that, I just need to remove the axle, as I say. So let's crack on with it. Removing Heidi's rear axle was a lot easier due to the fact that she doesn't have a diff or a prop shaft fitted. I started by removing the handbrake cable from its bracket on the floor. I then cut the brake flexi hose because this will be replaced anyway. I then set about unbolting the rear anti-roll bar from the chassis legs. The passenger side bolt has an extension on it which is an exhaust mount. The rear shock absorbers were already unbolted from the top, so there was just one nut to undo each side at the bottom of them. All that was left to do then was to undo the U-bolts that wrap around the axle. With the 4 nuts undone, I gave the base plates a bit of a whack, and that was the driver's side base plate, U-bolts and bump stop removed. On the passenger side, one of the U-bolts actually snapped, but these are going to get replaced anyway. And once the passenger side was all unbolted, I was able to remove Heidi's rear axle and pull it out from underneath the car. Look how solid Heidi's undercarriage is. It's certainly good enough for a drift toy. Some would say maybe it's too good. I removed the brake pipes from the axle, which didn't get damaged during the removal, and then it was time to finally get this thing welded up. First things first, I made a cardboard template of my plate, then I transferred it onto some 3mm thick steel, cut it out with my angle grinder, and then repeated the process for the other 3 plates. At this point, I was worried that I wasn't going to get Heidi's rear axle fitted by the end of the day. So I put a small trolley under each leaf spring and carefully rolled her back into the garage. Back on with the axle, and the next step was to mark around my plate so that I knew exactly where the welds were going to be. With those areas cleaned up with the grinder, it was time to start welding. First, I made sure that the bottom of the plate was attached to the leaf spring saddle. Then I clamped and welded the top of the plate to the axle tube itself, which meant it was then sturdy enough for me to whack the sides of the plate around with my club hammer. And once the sides were welded up, I just needed to repeat the process for the other 3 plates. But then we have a problem. It was all going so well until it then wasn't. So I was cracking on with welding the other 3 plates onto this axle off camera, and I was basically doing it simultaneously. So I'd welded them all to this bit, then used the G-clamp to close this bit up to the axle and welded this bit on all of them, and then I set about whacking, you know, the bits around and finalising the shape, and then the next stage was going to be to weld round the sides. So exactly the same as what you saw on this one, but I was doing them all simultaneously. And then all of a sudden the welder started playing up. The feed wire basically started coming through a lot slower, and inevitably it was getting burnt to the tip of the welder. And yeah, that was whilst I was working on this one. Now admittedly my tip and my shroud were really worn. You know, the shroud was getting all burnt up and the tip was, you know, really old. So I was kind of thinking that it was the tip being worn that, you know, it was causing too much friction as it was coming through, right, and slowing the wire down. But I kept persevering, kept cutting the burnt bit off of the tip. I even grabbed like a really thin drill bit and tried to put that down it. But yeah, nothing seemed to improve things at all. I tried turning the speed up on the welder, which kind of helped a bit, but then it made the welds too big. And they're already a bit too proud, to be honest, because the welder I don't think it's strong enough to be welding this metal. This is 3mm thick, so you know it's barely capable of welding up this axle anyway. But yeah, nothing really seemed to improve things. And whilst I was, you know, trying to improve things, I wasted a ton of gas. And yeah, eventually I just threw the towel in. Now overall, this job is going really well, and I'm really chuffed with what I've been able to achieve, and I'm confident that I'll be able to finish this once I fix the welder. And I'm pretty sure that I know what's going on with the welder. I actually took the torch home with me and dismantled it, and I've ordered a part. So this video is now going to take a very different turn as I try to fix my welder. So it's to be continued with regards to Heidi's rear axle, and it's to be continued with regards to Heidi herself, who is still leaning on the trolleys in the garage. The Amazon driver has been and delivered what I think I need to replace to get my welder working properly again. And here it is. Oh, and by the way, if you haven't already grabbed your official 2025 MH calendar, there is actually only a few left, so head over to my website and grab one now while you still can. But yeah, this is what I think they call a liner, but essentially it's the tube that the copper wire goes through when you're trying to weld. And that tube lives inside your torch, which I've put fully back together just to show you exactly how to replace it. And I may end up recycling this footage and making a tech tips video for my tech tips playlist, just for any of you guys that need to change your liner in future. It will make that video easier to find. And as it happens, I don't actually need to dismantle this as much as I assumed I needed to the other day when I took it apart. But yeah, if you look at the shroud that I was using, it is really mullered, all burnt. I have actually got some brand new ones now anyway, and I've also got some brand new tips, but I had to get them ordered in to Screwfix, so I just need to go and pick those up. And this tip here is actually a 1mm tip, even though the wire I was using was 0.8mm. And once I'd switched to this tip, just to rule out the tip causing my issues, and it was still getting burnt to the end, I knew that the tip wasn't the issue, and that's when I basically threw the towel in. But I am pretty sure that it is the liner that's causing my issues. But one thing I do want to show you that I thought might have been to do with my issues, but I'm pretty sure isn't, involves the motor that actually pushes the wire through. Now I don't actually have my spool of wire fitted in here, that would obviously go here, but the motor basically spins here, and that's what drags the wire through. And what I noticed when I was around the garage and having these issues is that when you first pull the trigger on the torch, the motor goes a bit slow, and then after a few seconds it speeds up. And you know, I thought that that was something to do with the issues, but I'm pretty sure it isn't. I'll just show you what it does. So if I just take this apart a little bit, just so you can see this better, this sort of clamps down and, you know, puts pressure on these rollers. If I take this thing off of this roller, you'll be able to actually see the roller spinning better. This is your roller that sort of grips the copper wire. You know, you've got one side for 0.8 and one side for 1mm. So, you know, it goes this way because it's the outer one that gets used. But yeah, if I clamp this back down, and hopefully this will come across on camera, that basically this spins a bit slow, and then after a few seconds it speeds up. So yeah, you can hear the motor make a different noise as it speeds up after that few seconds. And I think that's just because if you are welding for longer than a few seconds, it's inevitable that the whole job is going to be really hot and your pool of weld is going to be really hot. So you just need the wire to come through a bit quicker. So yeah, I'm pretty sure that that's working how it should, and the motor is absolutely fine. It's worth noting, I did actually bring this spool of copper home with me. This is a really old spool of copper. It's full of dust and, you know, it had corrosion on it. And when I took this torch apart the other day to sort of manually feed some wire into the tube to see if there was, you know, too much resistance, and there was, I've sort of read like since then that you really shouldn't be putting dirty or corroded wire through your torch. So yeah, definitely don't do that. And I won't be doing that today to show you. I don't have my new spool of copper wire here. But yeah, something to think about. Don't use old dirty copper, because that will clog up your tube and basically make it stop working prematurely. So that will definitely be getting binned. But yeah, I'm now going to set about fitting this new liner, which hopefully will make this welder work properly again. So first of all, I'm going to remove the torch from the welder. This one sort of screws in, and there it is. And this bit here is where your wire goes from the machine and to the torch. I will just show you how this comes apart, because I took this apart the other day, but now I realise I don't need to do this job. If I just unplug this first, actually. And yeah, if we spin this round to the right bit, there's a screw there. Once you undo that screw, this piece here comes off. There's a sort of joint line down there. Oh, you do have to undo this first, so yeah, so that's just like sort of quarter of a turn. And yeah, this all comes apart, but as I say, you don't actually need to take this apart at all. Another thing worth noting, when I was looking at some videos on YouTube, there's a nut missing off the end of here. There should be a nut that screws onto there. It's not the end of the world, but it just means that this is able to sort of pull out. Yeah, I suppose in theory I could just pull this out and thread the new one in without dismantling anything else, but that's not the way I'm going to do it, because I'm going to take this end apart a bit. And this comes apart really easily as well. Again, you've got one of these, quarter of a turn, and that comes off. And then you've just got two screws. One there, and one there. And then this all just comes apart. You've got some wires in here which go to the trigger. I have actually had these come apart a couple of times, and then, you know, the welder just stops working. I've crimped them a bit tighter with pliers, but yeah, basically these are able to unplug. So yeah, but I think that was probably because this bit here was loose and this was able to rotate, and then that was pulling the wires out. So yeah, this is still finger tight because it was apart the other day, but I will just undo these wires, and they sort of feed into this bit here. There's a sort of void in there where they can poke through. I suppose that's to stop them getting damaged or twisted up or whatever. But yeah, then the trigger bit comes off. With my old welder that I had years ago that was actually nicked out my garage, I had to replace this trigger because that stopped working. But yeah, this is fine. I'm pretty sure that these wires can go around anyway because it's just a switch at the end of the day. But yeah, both wires are red, so you can't even really make a note of which wire goes where. But yeah, I'm pretty sure it can go either way. And then yeah, this bit just unscrews. Normally it would be tight, you know, you've got a hexagon there to put a spanner on, but it is still finger tight from where I did it the other day. And if we take that off, you can see the liner inside. And I'm not sure whether you necessarily need to take this off to fit the new liner, but in my mind, the fact that this is bent, it could cause a restriction, and when you're pushing the new liner in, you don't want to end up kinking it or whatever. So yeah, now we're at this point, we can definitely pull the old liner out. So I'll just make sure that this is straightened out a bit, and literally just pull this out. And this has got some kinks in it, but that happened when I was actually trying to put this back into the torch the other day, just because I wanted to put it all back together before I showed this job on camera. But yeah, if you do get any kinks in this, that's also going to stop it working properly. But basically, when I put the dirty bit of copper wire through this, it was just really hard to like push or pull it through, and it shouldn't be like that. And the wire should be able to go through the liner nice and smoothly. So when I saw that that wasn't the case, then I was pretty sure that the liner was my issue. And basically what happens is, through use, the copper leaves little deposits, you know, little bits get shaved off it as it's being used, and they basically collect inside the liner, and then it just causes too much friction, basically. I have read online that some people will blow them through every now and again with an air line, just to, you know, clear out the debris and make the liner last a bit longer. I was kind of thinking that I could lube up the inside of the liner and maybe at least revive it enough to finish doing that job on the axle, but you know, that can just attract more dust and stuff into the liner, so that can be counterproductive. Although I think some welders do actually have like a little brush attachment here somewhere, so that as your wire is getting fed into the motor, it just gets cleaned, like as it's getting fed through, which I think is a really clever idea. But yeah, there's nothing like that on this machine. But this is a very budget welder. Anyway, let's chuck this new liner in. Installing the new liner is literally a case of just threading it into the torch. And when I felt some resistance, I straightened the torch out before carrying on. Eventually, the liner came out the other end, and I just carried on until I couldn't go any further. The liners come oversized and they need to be cut down to the correct length. I unscrewed the tip from the curved bit of the torch and passed the new liner through it. Then I screwed the curved bit of the torch into the other bit and then used 2 spanners to tighten it up. Next, I cut the excess off the liner so that it was flush with the end of the torch. And then it was a case of putting the rest of the torch back together, which was an exact reversal of the procedure to dismantle it. I screwed the tip back into the torch. This will of course be replaced when I pick my new ones up, and then I pushed on one of the new shrouds. All that was left to do then was to screw the torch back into the welder itself. So I made sure that all the connections were lined up with their holes and then just screwed it on. Without any welding wire or any metal, I couldn't fully test the welder, but I did confirm that the motor still spins when you push the trigger. Now, I'm not going to actually know if changing that liner has solved my issues until I get back around the garage and try to finish welding up Heidi's axle, but I'm 99.9% sure that the liner was the cause of the issue based on how it felt when I was manually trying to put the wire through the old liner before. Now, loads of you guys have actually been in touch ever since I've been doing welding with this welder on the channel, asking which welder I use. And it's from a company called Hitbox, although the logo looks like an S, so maybe the S goes in front of Hitbox, which I don't think would be a very good name for any product, but you know, it is a very budget welder, and yeah, a lot of people don't rate them. This was actually bought for me last Christmas by my beautiful girlfriend Kat, and it's been awesome, and it's been a game changer in terms of me working on my cars, so I'm very happy. Well, I was until I utterly failed the other day trying to do Heidi's axle. But yeah, I think this is like a 5-in-1 welder or something. There's the model number for anyone who's interested. It does gas, it does gasless, it does TIG, but I think you've got to buy the right torch for it to do that. I think it does stick welding as well. Yeah, I think it does 5 different types of welding, but you know, for normal MIG welding with thin metal, it's absolutely fine. Now, I'm not going to be able to carry on with Heidi's axle in this video because tomorrow I'm actually going to visit a friend of mine to get an update on his awesome classic Ford build. Those of you that have been watching my channel a while would have seen this car before, and yeah, very much looking forward to giving you guys an update on it. So that should be the next video, but to everyone who has watched this video, massive thanks to each and every one of you. If you did think it was any good, please do give it a thumbs up and a share. If you didn't, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Check the links in the description to follow me on social media. I'll leave my email address down there for anyone who wants to contact me. Also, I'll leave a link to my website for anyone who wants to grab some official MH merchandise. We've also got tons of really cool car parts and accessories on there, including the Type 9 gearbox bungs that I showed you earlier. And I'll leave a link to the Petrolhead Style website, which is my other company that supplies other car-themed clothing and products. Huge thanks, as always, to my patrons for your ongoing support. But other than that, until next time, thanks for watching.